The water was cold, but Evelyn Hart did not care. She had been swimming in this lake since she was a child, long before anyone had put up new fences or hired new guards. She moved through the water quietly, her arms slicing through the mist that still clung to the surface in the early morning light. She thought she was alone. She was wrong. A branch snapped somewhere behind the trees. Evelyn froze, her heart suddenly pounding. She had heard the rumors in the village. The old Duke had died months ago, and his son had returned from wherever he had been living to take over the estate. People said he had brought new staff, stricter rules, and no patience for trespassers. Evelyn was not supposed to be here. She never had permission, not really. But her grandmother used to bring her to this very lake when she was small, back when the old Duke barely noticed who wandered onto his land. Times had changed. She could feel it now in the stillness of the morning, in the way even the birds seemed to have gone quiet. She swam toward the reeds near the bank, trying to keep her movements small so she would not draw attention. Her clothes were folded neatly on a flat rock a few feet from the water's edge, and she cursed herself silently for leaving them so far away. If someone came now, she would have no way to explain herself. She was a school teacher, not a thief, but explaining that to an angry landowner or his guards would not be easy, especially not while standing waist-deep in his private lake with no way to cover herself decently. Footsteps came closer, slow, deliberate, unhurried. Whoever it was did not seem to be searching for her specifically. Evelyn pressed herself lower into the water, her chin nearly touching the surface, watching the tree line with wide eyes. A tall figure stepped out from between two old oaks. He wore a plain gray coat, nothing like the elaborate clothing she imagined a duke might wear, and for a moment, she thought he might simply be one of the groundskeepers. Then he stopped walking and looked directly at the lake, directly at her, and something in his posture told her immediately that this was not a servant. This was a man used to being obeyed. Evelyn's mind raced. She could try to explain herself, or she could stay hidden and hope he moved on without noticing her. But it was already too late for that. His eyes had found her, and he did not look away. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The lake seemed to hold its breath along with her. Evelyn tried to arrange her face into something calm, something that did not scream of guilt or fear, though her heart was still hammering hard enough that she was certain he could hear it from where he stood. "You are on private property," the man finally said. His voice was even, neither shouting nor threatening, but firm in a way that left no room for argument. "I know," Evelyn admitted, deciding that lying would only make things worse. "I am sorry. I did not think anyone would be awake this early." "I could say the same about you," he replied, and there was something almost amused in the way he said it, though his expression remained composed. Evelyn swallowed hard. She had expected shouting. She had expected him to call for guards, to threaten her with the local magistrate, to remind her in a cold voice exactly how much trouble a common village woman could find herself in for swimming uninvited in a duke's lake. Instead, he simply stood there, hands clasped behind his back, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "I used to swim here as a child," Evelyn said, filling the silence because she could not bear to stand in it any longer. "My grandmother would bring me." The old Duke never seemed to mind. I did not realize things would be different now. At the mention of the old Duke, something shifted in the stranger's face, a flicker of tension around his jaw that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Things are different now," he said quietly, "in more ways than one." Evelyn did not know what to make of that. She glanced toward the rock where her clothes were folded, painfully aware of how exposed her situation was, both literally and otherwise. "Would it be possible," she asked carefully, "for you to turn around, so that I might come out of the water and dress myself?" For the first time, something like a smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was small, barely there, but it changed his whole face, softened the sharp lines of his jaw, and brought a warmth to his eyes that had not been there a moment before. "Of course," he said, and he turned without hesitation, facing the trees instead of the lake. Evelyn moved quickly, climbing out of the water and pulling her simple dress over her still damp skin, her fingers fumbling slightly with the buttons in her haste. She kept glancing at his back, half expecting him to turn around despite his word, but he remained perfectly still, giving her the privacy she needed. "You may look now," she said finally, smoothing down her skirt and trying to regain some sense of dignity despite the circumstances. He turned back to face her, and this time his gaze was more curious than stern. "What is your name?" he asked. "Evelyn Hart," she answered. "I teach at the village school." "Evelyn Hart," he repeated, as though testing the sound of it. "I am Nathaniel Ashworth." The name struck her like a small shock. Ashworth. The very family whose land she had just been trespassing on, whose lake she had been swimming in without permission, whose new duke was standing not 10 feet away from her, having just watched her climb out of his private water like some kind of forest spirit caught unaware. Evelyn felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. "The Duke," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "For now, yes," Nathaniel said, and there was something odd in the way he said it, a weariness that did not match the youth in his face. He could not have been more than 30, and yet he spoke like a man carrying far more weight than his years should allow. Evelyn straightened her shoulders, preparing herself for whatever punishment or warning was about to come. She had trespassed on a duke's land, had been caught swimming without permission, and now stood before him with nothing to offer in her defense except the truth. She waited for him to speak, for him to tell her never to return, to threaten her with consequences if she dared step foot on his property again. Instead, Nathaniel looked past her, toward the lake, his expression turning distant and thoughtful. "Do you know," he said slowly, "that this is the first time since I arrived here that this lake has looked like anything more than water, sitting on a piece of land I now happen to own?" Evelyn blinked, caught off guard by the strange direction of his words. "I do not understand," she said honestly. "I have walked past this lake nearly every morning since I returned," he continued, his voice growing quieter, more reflective. "It has always seemed cold to me, empty. Just another thing on a long list of things I have inherited and do not particularly want. But today, watching you swim, it looked alive for the first time. It looked like something worth having." Evelyn did not know how to respond to that. She had expected anger, or at the very least stern disapproval. But instead she was standing here listening to a duke speak about his own lake as though it were a burden he had never asked to carry. There was something in his voice, some quiet sadness beneath the composed exterior, that made her forget, just for a moment, that she should be afraid of him. "I am glad it brought you some comfort," she said carefully, unsure of what else to say. Nathaniel's eyes returned to her, sharper now, as though he had just remembered himself. "You should not apologize for trespassing," he said. "Not when you have given me something I did not know I needed this morning." Evelyn's cheeks warmed again, though this time not from embarrassment alone. There was something disarming about the way he spoke, direct and unguarded, in a way she had not expected from a member of the nobility. She had grown up hearing stories about the old duke's coldness, his indifference to anyone outside his own circle, and she had assumed, perhaps unfairly, that his son would be cut from the same cloth. But the man standing before her now seemed nothing like the stories. "Does this mean I am not in trouble?" she asked, allowing a small hint of humor into her voice, testing the waters, so to speak, of this strange and unexpected conversation. Nathaniel's lips curved into that same small smile from before. "It means," he said, "that you are welcome to swim here whenever you like." Evelyn's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You are giving me permission to trespass on your own land?" "I am giving you permission to visit a lake that clearly means more to you than it currently means to me," he corrected gently. "Perhaps in time it will mean something to both of us." There was a strange, charged quality to the air between them now, something neither of them fully understood but both seemed to feel. Evelyn glanced down at her still damp hair, at the water dripping onto the grass beneath her feet, and tried to steady the odd flutter that had settled in her chest. "Thank you," she said finally, unsure of what else there was to say to such an unexpected kindness. "Do not thank me yet," Nathaniel replied, a hint of dry humor creeping into his tone. "You have not yet discovered how insufferable I can be once the sun is fully up." Evelyn laughed before she could stop herself, a genuine, surprised sound that seemed to catch them both off guard. Nathaniel's smile widened slightly at the sound of it, and for a moment, the weight that seemed to hang over him lifted, if only briefly. "I should return home," Evelyn said, glancing toward the path that led back toward the village. "Before anyone notices I am missing and starts asking questions I would rather not answer." "Of course," Nathaniel said, stepping aside to let her pass. As she walked by him, he added quietly, almost as an afterthought, I hope to see you here again, Miss Hart. Tomorrow, perhaps, if the weather allows. Evelyn paused, glancing back at him over her shoulder. The morning light had grown brighter now, casting a warm glow over the lake and the man standing beside it. A man who, only minutes ago, she had feared might have her dragged before the local magistrate. Instead, he stood there, looking almost hopeful, almost human, in a way she had not expected from someone of his position. Perhaps, she said, allowing herself a small smile, before turning and making her way down the path toward home. As she walked, her mind kept circling back to the strange encounter, to the unexpected kindness in his voice, to the words he had spoken about the lake looking alive for the first time. She did not know what to make of Nathaniel Ashworth, this new duke who seemed so different from everything the village had whispered about his family. But as she glanced back one final time before the trees swallowed the lake from view, she found herself hoping, against her better judgment, that tomorrow's weather would indeed allow for another swim. Behind her, Nathaniel remained standing at the water's edge long after she had disappeared from sight, his gaze fixed on the gentle ripples still moving across the surface of the lake. For the first time since arriving to claim a title and an estate he had never wanted, he felt something other than the heavy weight of obligation pressing down on his chest. It was small and fragile and entirely unexpected, but it was there nonetheless, and he found himself unwilling to let it go so easily. He turned and walked back toward the manor, his steps lighter than they had been in months, already counting the hours until morning would come again. Evelyn did not sleep well that night. She told herself it was simply the excitement of the day, the strange thrill of having spoken face to face with the new Duke of Ashworth, a man whose name had been whispered through the village for weeks with equal parts curiosity and dread. But when she closed her eyes, it was not fear she felt when she pictured him standing at the edge of the lake. It was something warmer, something she was not yet ready to name. By the time dawn broke the next morning, she found herself walking the familiar path toward the lake, before she had even fully decided to go. Her feet seemed to carry her there on their own, guided by a curiosity she could not quite suppress. She told herself she only wanted to see if he had meant what he said, if the offer of the lake had been genuine, or simply a polite gesture that would be forgotten by morning light. He was already there when she arrived, sitting on a large flat stone near the water, a book resting unopened in his lap. He looked up when he heard her approaching footsteps, and something in his expression eased, as though he had been uncertain she would actually come. "You came," he said, setting the book aside as he rose to his feet. "You said I was welcome," Evelyn replied, trying to sound more casual than she felt. "I did not want to be rude and ignore an invitation from a duke." Nathaniel's mouth curved into a small, genuine smile. "I was beginning to think I had imagined our conversation yesterday." "It was strange enough that I considered the same thing," Evelyn admitted, walking closer to the water's edge. The morning air was cool against her skin, and the lake looked calm and inviting, its surface barely disturbed by the gentle breeze. "Are you always out here so early?" "Lately, yes," Nathaniel said, glancing toward the manor in the distance, its gray stone walls just visible above the tree line. "The house feels different in the early hours, quieter, less like a place full of people waiting for me to make decisions I am not yet prepared to make." Evelyn tilted her head, studying him with open curiosity. "That sounds like a heavy way to describe your own home." "It has not felt like my home in a long while," Nathaniel admitted, and there was a rawness to his voice that surprised her, a willingness to be honest that she had not expected from someone of his rank. "I left when I was young. My father and I did not see the world in the same way, and it was easier for both of us if I stayed away. I never intended to come back, not like this." "I am sorry," Evelyn said softly, sensing the weight behind his words, even though he had not explained everything. "Do not be," Nathaniel said, shaking his head slightly. "It is simply the way things are now. I have a title I never wanted, an estate full of people who expect me to fix problems I did not create, and a lake that, until yesterday, felt like just another responsibility rather than something worth enjoying." Evelyn found herself smiling, despite the seriousness of his words. "And now?" "Now," Nathaniel said, his eyes meeting hers. "It feels a little different." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the soft sound of water lapping against the shore, and the distant call of birds waking to greet the morning. Evelyn glanced toward the lake, feeling the familiar pull of the water calling to her. But she hesitated. unsure of the proper way to behave in front of a man of such high standing. "You may swim, if you like," Nathaniel said, noticing her hesitation. "I will not intrude. I only wish to see if you would return." Evelyn considered his words for a moment before nodding. She moved a short distance away, behind a cluster of bushes that offered enough privacy for her to change into the simple swimming clothes she had brought with her this time, having learned her lesson from the day before. When she emerged, Nathaniel was seated once again on the flat stone, his attention politely directed toward the far side of the lake, giving her the space she needed. She waded into the water slowly, letting the coolness settle over her skin, before pushing off and swimming toward the center of the lake. For a while, she simply enjoyed the sensation of the water around her, the freedom of movement, the peace that came from doing something familiar and beloved. When she finally glanced back toward the shore, she found Nathaniel watching her, though he quickly looked away, a faint color rising in his cheeks. "You may watch," Evelyn called out, laughing softly. "I do not mind." Nathaniel's expression relaxed, and he allowed himself to observe her more openly, though there was nothing improper in the way he did so. It was simple admiration, the kind one might feel watching something beautiful and unexpected unfold before them. "You swim well," he said as she made her way back toward the shallows. "My grandmother taught me," Evelyn said, standing waist-deep in the water, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. She used to say that a person who could not swim had never truly learned to trust themselves. "That is an interesting way of looking at it," Nathaniel mused. "I never learned properly myself." Evelyn's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You cannot swim?" "I can manage well enough to avoid drowning," Nathaniel said with a hint of self-deprecating humor. "But I would not call it swimming in any graceful sense of the word." "Perhaps I could teach you," Evelyn offered before she could stop herself, the words slipping out with more boldness than she had intended. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "I would like that," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun. She climbed out of the water and dried herself as best she could before changing back into her regular clothes, behind the same cluster of bushes. When she returned, Nathaniel had picked his book back up, though he set it aside again as soon as she approached. "Will you walk with me a while?" he asked. "There is a path along the far side of the lake that offers a rather pleasant view of the countryside." Evelyn hesitated only briefly before agreeing, and the two of them began to walk together along the water's edge, the manor slowly disappearing behind the trees as they moved further from the estate's more formal grounds. Nathaniel told her about his years away from Ashworth, about the places he had traveled and the things he had seen, though he was careful to avoid speaking too much about his father or the circumstances that had led to their estrangement. Evelyn, in turn, told him about her work at the village school, about the children she taught, and the small joys she found in watching them learn to read and write. "You seem to genuinely love your work," Nathaniel observed as they walked. "That is rare, I think. Most people I have met seem to endure their responsibilities rather than embrace them." "I suppose I am fortunate then," Evelyn said. "Teaching gives me a sense of purpose. I like knowing that in some small way, I am helping shape the future of this village." "That is more than I can say for myself," Nathaniel admitted, a shadow passing briefly over his expression. "I still do not know what purpose I am meant to serve here, beyond simply keeping the estate from falling apart. Perhaps that purpose will reveal itself in time," Evelyn offered gently. "You have only just returned. It seems unfair to expect yourself to have all the answers so soon." Nathaniel glanced at her, a look of quiet gratitude softening his features. "You have a way of making difficult things sound simple, Miss Hart." "I have a way of making things sound simple because I am, at heart, a simple person," Evelyn replied with a small laugh. "I do not have grand estates or family titles to worry about. My concerns are much smaller." "I do not think that makes you simple," Nathaniel said, his voice suddenly more serious. "I think it makes you fortunate, in ways I am only beginning to understand." They walked in comfortable silence for a while longer, the sun climbing higher in the sky and casting long shadows across the grass. Eventually, Evelyn realized how much time had passed and reluctantly informed Nathaniel that she needed to return to the village before her absence became a topic of conversation among her neighbors. "Will you come again tomorrow?" Nathaniel asked as they parted ways near the edge of the estate grounds. "If the weather allows," Evelyn said, echoing his own words from the day before, a teasing lilt in her voice. "I find myself hoping for clear skies then," Nathaniel replied, and the warmth in his smile stayed with her the entire walk home. Over the following days, their morning meetings became something of a quiet routine, a secret shared between the two of them that neither felt any particular urgency to explain to others. Evelyn taught Nathaniel to swim, laughing at his early clumsy attempts and gently correcting his form until he began to move through the water with something resembling confidence. In turn, Nathaniel shared stories of the distant places he had visited, painting pictures with his words of cities and landscapes Evelyn had only ever imagined. There was an ease between them that neither had expected, a comfort that seemed to grow with each passing morning. Evelyn found herself looking forward to their meetings with an eagerness she tried, not entirely successfully, to hide from herself. She told herself it was simply pleasant company, nothing more. But there were moments, quiet moments, when Nathaniel would look at her in a certain way that made her heart beat a little faster than she cared to admit. For Nathaniel's part, the lake had become the one place in his new life that did not feel weighed down by obligation or expectation. It was the one place where he was not the Duke of Ashworth, burdened by debts and decisions and the disapproving ghosts of his family's past. At the lake, with Evelyn, he was simply Nathaniel, a man learning to swim and, perhaps, learning to feel something like happiness again. Neither of them spoke openly about what was growing between them, content for now to let it exist quietly in the mornings they shared, unaware of how quickly the peaceful bubble they had built for themselves was about to be tested by the world beyond the lake's quiet shores. Weeks passed, and the mornings at the lake became the quiet center around which the rest of Evelyn's days seemed to revolve. She would rise before the sun, dress quickly, and walk the familiar path through the trees, her heart lifting with each step closer to the water. Nathaniel was always there before her now, no longer sitting with an unread book in his lap but instead pacing along the shore, watching for her arrival with an eagerness he no longer bothered to hide. One morning, as the mist curled low over the surface of the lake, Evelyn arrived to find Nathaniel already standing waist-deep in the water, attempting to practice the strokes she had taught him the week before. His movements were still a little awkward, his arms cutting through the water with more force than grace. But there was a determination in his effort that made Evelyn smile as she watched from the shore. "You are improving," she called out, setting down the small basket she had brought with her. Nathaniel paused, wiping water from his eyes as he turned to face her. "I have had an excellent teacher," he replied, a note of pride creeping into his voice despite his obvious exhaustion. "What is in the basket?" he asked, nodding toward the item she had set on the grass. "Bread and cheese," Evelyn said. "I thought we might eat something after our swim today, rather than simply parting ways as soon as the sun rises too high." Something flickered across Nathaniel's face, a mixture of surprise and quiet pleasure. "That sounds wonderful," he said. "It has been a long time since I shared a simple meal with anyone, without the weight of formal conversation hanging over every bite." Evelyn joined him in the water, and for a while, they simply swam together, enjoying the cool water and the warmth of the rising sun on their skin. When they finally emerged, dripping and breathless from laughter after Nathaniel attempted, and failed, to race her across the width of the lake, they settled onto the grass near the water's edge and shared the food Evelyn had brought. "Tell me something about your family," Nathaniel said as they ate, breaking off a piece of bread and passing it to her. "You know a great deal about mine, or at least what the village whispers about it, yet I know almost nothing about yours." Evelyn considered his request for a moment, before answering. "There is not much to tell. My father passed when I was young, and my mother raised me and my brother on her own. She worked hard to make sure we had enough, even when there was little to go around. My grandmother lived with us as well, until she passed a few years ago. She was the one who taught me to swim, and to read, and to never let anyone make me feel small for where I came from." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Nathaniel said softly. "She was," Evelyn agreed, a fond smile touching her lips. "She used to say that titles and wealth meant very little if a person did not have kindness to go along with them." I think she would have found this whole situation rather amusing, honestly. Her granddaughter, sharing bread with a duke beside the very lake she used to sneak into as a girl. Nathaniel chuckled, though his expression soon turned more thoughtful. "May I ask you something personal, Evelyn?" She glanced at him, noting the use of her first name, something he had not done before. It sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "You may ask," she said. "I cannot promise I will answer." "Have you ever been courted?" Nathaniel asked, his voice careful, as though testing the boundaries of what was appropriate between them. "Forgive me, if the question is too forward." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Memories she had tried to bury, resurfacing unwillingly. "There was someone, once," she admitted slowly. "A young man from a wealthy family who visited the village a few summers ago. He seemed kind at first, attentive in a way I had never experienced before. I allowed myself to hope that something real might grow between us." "What happened?" Nathaniel asked gently, sensing the shift in her mood. "His family did not approve," Evelyn said, her voice quieter now. "They made it very clear that a schoolteacher from a small village was not a suitable match for their son, regardless of how he felt about me. He did not fight for me the way I had hoped he might. In the end, he chose to honor his family's wishes rather than his own feelings, and I learned a difficult lesson about the distance between people of different standing." Nathaniel's expression darkened slightly, though not with anger directed at her. "I am sorry that happened to you," he said. "It was wrong of him to let you believe in something he was not prepared to defend." "It taught me to be more careful," Evelyn said, forcing a small smile onto her face, despite the old ache the memory still carried. "I suppose that is why I have been hesitant to fully trust what has been growing between us these past weeks. I do not wish to make the same mistake twice." Nathaniel reached out, hesitating only briefly, before gently taking her hand in his. "I cannot promise you that the world beyond this lake will be simple," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "There will be those who look at us and see only the differences in our positions, but I can promise you that I am not the sort of man who abandons what matters to him simply because it becomes difficult." Evelyn looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers, and allowed herself, for the first time, to believe that perhaps this time might be different. "I want to believe you," she said softly. "Then believe me," Nathaniel said simply, and the quiet certainty in his voice settled something anxious within her chest. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the light shift and change over the surface of the lake, before Evelyn reluctantly announced that she needed to prepare for the school day ahead. Nathaniel walked with her partway down the path, neither of them quite ready to part ways, though both understood the necessity of it. "I have been thinking," Nathaniel said as they paused near the edge of the estate grounds, "that I have been away from the village itself for far too long. My father rarely ventured beyond the manor walls in his later years, and I fear the people there have come to expect little else from the Ashworth family." "What are you thinking of doing?" Evelyn asked, curious. "I would like to visit the school," Nathaniel said, "to see the work you do, and perhaps to better understand the community I am now responsible for, rather than simply hearing about it secondhand from my steward." Evelyn felt a small thrill of nervous excitement at the idea. "The children would be thrilled to meet you," she said. "Though I imagine some of the parents might be rather more anxious about the visit than the children themselves." "I promise to be on my best behavior," Nathaniel said with a teasing smile, "though I make no guarantees about my swimming skills if any of them ask for a demonstration." Evelyn laughed, the sound carrying easily across the quiet morning air. "I will hold you to that promise," she said, before turning to make her way back toward the village, glancing back once to see Nathaniel still watching her from where they had parted, a thoughtful expression on his face. True to his word, Nathaniel visited the village school later that same week. His arrival caused quite a stir among the children, who had never seen a real duke up close, and peppered him with questions about castles and horses and whether he owned a crown. Nathaniel answered each question with patient good humor, crouching down to their level, and even allowing one particularly bold young boy to examine the ring he wore on his finger, a family heirloom that had been passed down for generations. Evelyn watched from the front of the classroom, a warmth spreading through her chest, as she observed how naturally Nathaniel interacted with the children, how genuinely interested he seemed in their small concerns and curiosities. It was a side of him few in the village would have expected from a member of the Ashworth family, and she found herself falling a little further under his spell with each passing moment. After the visit, as the children returned to their lessons and Nathaniel prepared to take his leave, he lingered near the doorway, watching Evelyn as she helped a young girl with her letters. When she finally looked up and met his gaze, something passed between them, unspoken but deeply felt, a recognition of the connection that had grown steadily stronger over the past weeks. "Thank you for allowing me to visit," Nathaniel said as he prepared to leave. "I understand now, even more than before, why you find such purpose in this work." "Thank you for coming," Evelyn replied. "The children will speak of nothing else for weeks, I imagine." "Then perhaps I shall have to visit again," Nathaniel said, his eyes holding hers a moment longer than necessary, before he finally turned and made his way back toward the estate. Word of the Duke's visit to the village school spread quickly, as such things always did in a community as small and closely connected as theirs. By the following morning, when Evelyn made her way to the lake, she could already sense a change in the air, a shift in how the village regarded both her and the new Duke of Ashworth. Some of the whispers she overheard were curious, even hopeful, wondering if perhaps this new Duke might prove kinder and more attentive to the village than his predecessor had been. Others, however, carried a sharper edge, a wariness born of old wounds, and long memories that would not be so easily soothed by a single pleasant visit. Evelyn tried not to let the whispers trouble her too much as she walked toward the lake that morning, but a small seed of unease had been planted, one that would only grow more difficult to ignore as the weeks continued to pass and the connection between her and Nathaniel deepened further, drawing the attention of a world neither of them had yet fully prepared to face together. The whispers Evelyn had noticed after Nathaniel's visit to the school did not fade with time, as she had hoped they might. If anything, they grew louder, weaving through the narrow streets of the village like smoke that could not be contained. She first felt the full weight of it one afternoon, while purchasing bread from the local baker, a kind older woman named Margaret, who had known Evelyn since she was a small child. "You want to be careful, dear," Margaret said quietly, as she wrapped the loaf in cloth, her eyes flicking briefly toward the door, as though checking to see who might overhear. "People are talking about you and the young Duke. Some of it is not kind." "What are they saying?" Evelyn asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "That you are chasing after a title you have no business hoping for," Margaret said gently, not unkindly, but with the careful honesty of someone who genuinely wished to spare Evelyn future pain. "That a schoolteacher has no place keeping company with a member of the Ashworth family, no matter how friendly he might seem." Evelyn accepted the bread with a forced smile, thanking Margaret before stepping back out into the street, her chest tight with a discomfort she had not expected to feel so strongly. She had known, of course, that spending time with Nathaniel carried certain risks, that people would talk, but hearing it spoken aloud so plainly made the reality of their situation feel suddenly much heavier. As she walked home, she passed a group of women gathered near the well, their conversation dropping to hushed tones the moment they noticed her approach. One of them, a woman named Charlotte who had never particularly cared for Evelyn even before any of this began, made no effort to hide the disapproval in her expression. "I hear the Duke has taken quite an interest in our schoolteacher," Charlotte said, loud enough for Evelyn to hear as she passed. "I wonder how long that will last, once his family reminds him of his true responsibilities." Evelyn kept her chin lifted and continued walking, refusing to give the women the satisfaction of seeing how deeply the words had struck her. But once she was alone in her small home, the weight of it settled fully upon her shoulders, old fears resurfacing with painful clarity. She thought of the young man from years before, of how quickly his family's disapproval had ended what she had believed, for a brief time, might have been something real. Was she simply setting herself up for the same heartbreak, only with far greater stakes this time? That evening, as the sun began to set behind the distant hills, Evelyn sat by her window, staring out at the darkening sky, lost in troubled thought. She did not go to the lake the following morning, telling herself it was simply exhaustion, though in truth she was afraid of what she might feel if she saw Nathaniel again, while her heart was still so unsettled by the whispers that had begun to follow her through the village. Nathaniel, for his part, had no idea of the gossip circulating through the village, nor did he fully understand why Evelyn had not appeared at their usual meeting place that morning. He waited by the lake far longer than was reasonable, watching the path through the trees with growing concern, before finally accepting that she was not coming, and making his way back toward the manor with a heaviness in his chest he could not quite explain. His concerns were soon overshadowed, however, by a matter of far greater urgency waiting for him upon his return. Mr. Bennet, the family solicitor who had managed the Ashworth estate's affairs for many years, was waiting for him in the study, a thick stack of papers spread across the desk before him. "Your Grace," Bennet said, rising as Nathaniel entered the room. "I apologize for the early hour. But there are matters concerning the estate that require your immediate attention. Nathaniel settled into the chair behind his desk, gesturing for Bennett to continue, though his mind was still partly occupied with thoughts of Evelyn's unexplained absence. "What sort of matters?" he asked. "Your father, may he rest in peace, left the estate in a more precarious financial position than perhaps you were aware," Bennett said carefully, sliding several documents across the desk. "There are debts owed to various parties, and the income from the estate's current holdings is not sufficient to cover them in a timely manner." Nathaniel frowned, scanning the numbers before him with growing unease. "How serious is the situation?" "Serious enough that without intervention, the estate could face significant difficulty within the next few years," Bennett said gravely. "However, there is a solution that would resolve the matter swiftly and without further complication." "Go on," Nathaniel said, though something in the solicitor's careful tone made him uneasy. "Lord Whitmore's daughter, Margaret Whitmore, comes with a substantial dowry," Bennett explained. "A marriage between yourself and Miss Whitmore would not only resolve the estate's financial concerns, but would also strengthen important family connections that your father worked hard to cultivate before his passing." Nathaniel felt something cold settle in his stomach at the suggestion. "You are proposing that I marry a woman I have never met, purely for financial convenience?" "I am proposing a practical solution to a serious problem," Bennett said, his tone patient but firm. "Your Grace, I understand this may not be the future you envisioned for yourself, but the responsibilities of your title extend beyond personal preference. The tenants who depend on this estate, the staff who have served this family for generations, they all rely on the stability that only a sound financial future can provide." Nathaniel sat back in his chair, the weight of the conversation pressing down on him with renewed force. He thought of Evelyn, of the mornings they had shared at the lake, of the growing feelings he had been reluctant to fully name even to himself. The idea of setting all of that aside for a marriage of financial convenience felt like a betrayal, not only to her, but to the small, fragile happiness he had only recently begun to discover. "I need time to consider this," Nathaniel said finally, his voice tight with restrained frustration. "Of course, Your Grace," Bennett said, gathering the documents back into a neat stack. "But I would caution against delaying too long. Lord Whitmore has expressed interest in finalizing an arrangement before the season concludes." After Bennett departed, Nathaniel remained alone in the study for a long while, staring blankly at the papers left behind, his thoughts a tangled mess of obligation and desire. He understood, on some level, the necessity of what Bennett was suggesting. The estate's stability affected far more people than himself, and as Duke, it was his responsibility to ensure their well-being, regardless of his personal feelings. But the thought of marrying a stranger, of abandoning whatever was growing between himself and Evelyn, felt like tearing away a piece of himself he had only just begun to discover. Meanwhile, in the village, Evelyn continued to grapple with her own doubts, made worse by the fact that Nathaniel had not appeared at the school again since his initial visit, nor had she seen him at the lake in the days following her decision to stay away. She told herself it was for the best, that perhaps the distance would allow both of them to see more clearly whether what had grown between them was real, or simply the product of two lonely people, finding comfort in each other's company, during a strange and uncertain time. Her friend and fellow teacher, a warm and practical woman named Grace, noticed Evelyn's troubled mood during their shared lunch one afternoon at the schoolhouse. "You have been quiet these past few days," Grace observed, setting down her cup of tea. "Is something troubling you?" Evelyn hesitated before answering, unsure of how much to share even with someone she trusted as much as Grace. "I have been spending time with the Duke," she admitted finally. "At the lake, in the mornings. But people have begun to talk, and I fear I may have allowed myself to hope for something that was never meant to be." Grace considered her words carefully before responding. "The village will always talk, Evelyn. That is simply the nature of a place this small. But you must ask yourself whether what you feel for him is genuine, and whether he has given you any real reason to doubt his intentions." "He has been nothing but kind," Evelyn admitted. "Attentive, thoughtful, honest in ways I did not expect from someone of his position. But kindness is easy to offer when there is nothing yet at stake. I do not know if that kindness would survive the pressures his family will surely place upon him." "Then perhaps you owe it to yourself, and to him, to find out," Grace said gently, "rather than allowing fear and gossip to decide the matter before either of you has had the chance to." Evelyn considered her friend's words carefully over the following days, the internal struggle between hope and self-protection warring within her. It was not until nearly a week had passed, during which neither she nor Nathaniel made any attempt to reach out to the other, that circumstances finally forced the two of them back into each other's path. Evelyn had gone to the market on the edge of the village to purchase supplies for the school when she rounded a corner and found herself face to face with Nathaniel, who had apparently ventured into the village on some errand of his own. Both of them froze at the unexpected encounter, a week's worth of unspoken thoughts and doubts hanging heavily in the air between them. "Evelyn," Nathaniel said softly, relief and something more complicated flickering across his features. "I had begun to wonder if I had done something to upset you." "You have not done anything wrong," Evelyn said quickly, though the words felt inadequate, given the distance that had grown between them. "I simply needed some time to think." "About us?" Nathaniel asked, his voice quieter now, more vulnerable than she had heard it before. Evelyn nodded slowly. "People have been talking, Nathaniel, about the difference in our stations, about what could possibly come of a friendship between a duke and a village school teacher. I do not wish to cause you difficulty with your family or your position." Nathaniel's expression grew troubled, and for a moment Evelyn feared he might confirm the very doubts she had been struggling against. But instead, he stepped closer, his voice steady, despite the uncertainty clearly weighing on him. "I care very little for what people whisper in the streets," he said. "What I care about is whether you still wish to see me, regardless of what challenges may lie ahead." Evelyn looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation or doubt, and found only quiet sincerity in return. "I do wish to see you," she admitted softly. "I have missed our mornings at the lake more than I care to admit." Relief washed visibly over Nathaniel's features, though it was quickly tempered by something more troubled, a shadow he seemed to be trying to hide. "There are matters concerning the estate that I must attend to," he said carefully, "matters that may complicate things further before they improve. But I do not wish for that complication to come between us, not if you are willing to face it alongside me." Evelyn did not yet know what he meant, nor did she press him for further explanation, in the middle of a busy market street, where curious eyes might easily overhear. "Will you tell me, in time?" she asked instead. "I promise I will," Nathaniel said, and though the weight of unspoken worry remained heavy behind his eyes, the warmth of his smile as he looked at her once more was enough, for now, to ease the fear that had settled in her heart over the past difficult week. Nearly 2 weeks passed before Nathaniel found the courage to invite Evelyn to something beyond the privacy of their morning meetings at the lake. The Ashworth estate was hosting its annual summer garden gathering, a tradition his father had maintained for decades, drawing members of the local gentry and a handful of visiting nobility to the grounds for an afternoon of polite conversation and carefully performed hospitality. Nathaniel had considered canceling the event altogether, given everything weighing on his mind, but his aunt, Lady Josephine Ashworth, had insisted that abandoning tradition so soon after his father's passing would send entirely the wrong message to those who already doubted his commitment to the family's legacy. It was during a quiet morning swim, the mist still clinging low over the water, that Nathaniel finally worked up the nerve to ask Evelyn to attend as his guest. "I would like you to come," he said, watching her carefully for her reaction, "to the garden gathering. I understand it is a great deal to ask, given everything that has already been said about us in the village, but I find I do not wish to spend the afternoon surrounded by people who mean very little to me, while the one person whose company I most enjoy remains absent." Evelyn considered his request with visible hesitation. "Nathaniel, your family's guests will not be like the villagers. They will not simply whisper behind my back. They may say things directly to my face, and I do not know if I am prepared for that kind of scrutiny." "I will be beside you the entire time," Nathaniel promised, his voice firm with quiet determination. "I will not allow anyone to make you feel unwelcome in what is, for now, still my home." After several more minutes of gentle persuasion, Evelyn finally agreed, though a knot of anxiety had settled firmly in her stomach at the thought of facing Nathaniel's world so directly for the first time. She spent the days leading up to the gathering, feeling increasingly nervous, borrowing a modest but elegant dress from Grace, who insisted on helping her prepare despite Evelyn's protests that she did not wish to trouble her friend so much. "You look wonderful," Grace assured her on the morning of the gathering, adjusting the final pin in Evelyn's carefully arranged hair. Do not let any of those people convince you otherwise. The Ashworth Gardens had been transformed for the occasion. Long tables draped in fine linen, arranged beneath colorful canopies, musicians playing softly near the fountain, and dozens of finely dressed guests strolling among the carefully manicured hedges and blooming flower beds. Evelyn felt distinctly out of place the moment she arrived, painfully aware of the curious, and in some cases, openly judgmental glances directed her way, as word quickly spread of who she was and why she had been invited. Nathaniel met her near the entrance to the garden, his face brightening the moment he saw her. "You came," he said softly, echoing the words he had spoken to her that very first morning at the lake. "I told you I would," Evelyn replied, trying to steady the nervous flutter in her chest as he offered his arm to escort her further into the gathering. They had not gone far before Lady Josephine intercepted them, her sharp eyes taking in Evelyn's appearance with an expression that revealed little of her true thoughts. "Nathaniel," she said, her tone carefully polite, "you must introduce me to your guest." "Aunt Josephine, this is Evelyn Hart," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying a note of protective firmness. "She teaches at the village school." "How charming," Lady Josephine said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "It is not every day we welcome someone from the village to one of our family gatherings." Evelyn forced a polite smile of her own, sensing the underlying criticism hidden within the pleasant words. "Thank you for having me," she said carefully. Lady Josephine's attention shifted back to Nathaniel, her expression growing more pointed. "I understand Lord Whitmore and his daughter will be joining us shortly. I do hope you have not forgotten the importance of making a good impression this afternoon." Nathaniel's jaw tightened slightly at the mention of the Whitmores, and Evelyn felt a cold unease settle over her at the reminder that whatever pressures Nathaniel had alluded to during their conversation in the village were clearly still very much present, even here, in the middle of what was supposed to be a pleasant social gathering. As Lady Josephine moved off to greet other arriving guests, Evelyn turned to Nathaniel with a questioning look. "Lord Whitmore's daughter?" she asked carefully. "I will explain everything," Nathaniel promised quietly, though the tension in his voice did little to ease her growing concern. "Not here, not now, but soon. I promise you that." Before Evelyn could press him further, they were approached by a cluster of finely dressed young women, who greeted Nathaniel with practiced smiles, while directing far cooler glances toward Evelyn. "Your Grace," one of them said, curtsying gracefully. "We had heard rumors of a new companion accompanying you this afternoon, though I confess, we did not expect her to be quite so unexpected a choice." Evelyn felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment at the thinly veiled insult, but before she could formulate any response, Nathaniel spoke first, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "Miss Hart is a valued member of this community," he said firmly. "I would ask that my guests extend her the same courtesy they would extend to anyone else attending this gathering." The young woman's smile faltered slightly under the weight of his tone, and she offered a hasty, slightly flustered curtsy before excusing herself and her companions from the conversation entirely. Evelyn glanced up at Nathaniel, a mixture of gratitude and surprise passing through her at how readily he had defended her, without hesitation or apology. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You do not need to thank me for simply speaking the truth," Nathaniel replied, though the protective warmth in his eyes told her the moment had meant something significant to him as well. The afternoon continued in much the same fashion, with Evelyn enduring a steady stream of curious glances and carefully worded comments from various guests, though none quite so bold as the earlier encounter. Nathaniel remained close by her side throughout, introducing her when appropriate, and gently steering conversations away from topics that seemed likely to cause her discomfort. It was during a lull in the afternoon's festivities, as Evelyn stood momentarily alone, near a hedge of blooming roses, while Nathaniel spoke briefly with one of the estate's tenant farmers, who had approached him with a concern, that she found herself approached by a young woman she did not recognize, elegantly dressed, in a gown far finer than anything Evelyn owned. "You must be Miss Hart," the young woman said, her tone surprisingly warm, compared to the coolness Evelyn had grown accustomed to throughout the afternoon. "I am Margaret Whitmore." Evelyn's stomach tightened at the name, memories of Lady Josephine's earlier comment resurfacing sharply. "It is a pleasure to meet you," she managed, though her voice betrayed some of her unease. Margaret studied her for a long moment, an expression of quiet consideration on her face. I understand there has been talk of an arrangement between myself and the Duke, she said, her directness catching Evelyn slightly off guard. I wanted you to hear the truth from me, rather than the rumors circulating through this garden. I would appreciate that, Evelyn said carefully. My father is eager for the match, for reasons that have far more to do with family alliances and financial convenience than any genuine affection between myself and Nathaniel. Margaret explained. I have met him only briefly, on 2 occasions, and while I found him perfectly pleasant, I have seen no indication from him of any romantic interest whatsoever. If anything, watching him today, I suspect his heart already belongs to someone else entirely. Evelyn's breath caught slightly at the pointed implication behind Margaret's words. I do not wish to cause difficulty for you, she said honestly. If your father and his family are expecting a match between you and Nathaniel, I would not want to be the reason that arrangement becomes complicated. Margaret offered a small, surprisingly kind smile. You are not the one complicating anything, Miss Hart. My father's ambitions are his own, and I have little enthusiasm for a marriage, built purely on financial necessity, rather than genuine feeling. If Nathaniel's heart lies elsewhere, I would rather know it plainly than spend years trapped in a marriage neither of us truly wants. Their conversation was interrupted by Nathaniel's return, his expression shifting to one of careful neutrality, as he noticed Margaret standing beside Evelyn. Miss Whitmore, he said politely. I hope you are enjoying the gathering. I was just becoming acquainted with Miss Hart, Margaret replied smoothly, offering Nathaniel a knowing look before excusing herself with practiced grace, leaving the 2 of them alone once more, amid the colorful chaos of the garden party. What did she say to you? Nathaniel asked, once Margaret had moved out of earshot, concern evident in his expression. She was kinder than I expected, Evelyn admitted. She told me the arrangement your family hopes for is not something she desires either. Nathaniel's shoulders relaxed slightly at her words, though the underlying tension in his posture did not fully disappear. I owe you a full explanation, he said quietly. About the estate's finances, about the pressure my family has placed upon me to consider a marriage of convenience. I did not wish to burden you with it before I had a clearer sense of how I intended to handle the situation. I would rather know the truth, however difficult, than be left wondering, Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the anxious flutter still present in her chest. Nathaniel nodded, glancing around at the gathered guests before gently guiding Evelyn toward a quieter corner of the garden, away from prying eyes and curious ears. There, beneath the shade of an old oak tree, he finally explained everything Bennett had revealed to him weeks earlier, the debts left behind by his father, the pressure to secure the estate's future through a strategic marriage, the difficult choice he had been wrestling with ever since. Evelyn listened in silence, her heart aching at the weight he had been carrying alone, unspoken, throughout the very weeks when their connection had been deepening so steadily at the lake. Why did you not tell me sooner? She asked finally. Because I did not wish for this decision to hang over what we had found together, Nathaniel admitted. I did not want you to feel as though our time at the lake was somehow diminished by matters of duty and obligation that had nothing to do with either of us personally. But it does have something to do with us, Evelyn said gently. Whatever choice you make regarding your family's expectations will affect us both, Nathaniel. I would rather face that reality honestly than pretend it does not exist. Nathaniel reached for her hand, holding it gently within his own. I do not know yet how I will resolve this, he admitted, but I want you to know that whatever path I choose, it will not be one that dismisses what has grown between us so easily. You matter to me, Evelyn, more than any arrangement my family might wish to impose. Evelyn wanted desperately to believe him, and in that quiet moment beneath the oak tree, surrounded by the distant sounds of music and polite laughter, she allowed herself to hold on to that hope, even as a small, cautious part of her heart remained braced for the possibility that duty might ultimately prove stronger than desire. As the afternoon gathering finally began to wind down, guests slowly making their way toward waiting carriages, Lady Josephine approached Nathaniel once more, her expression carrying a seriousness that had not been present earlier in the day. Lord Whitmore wishes to speak with you before he departs, she said. He is eager to discuss finalizing arrangements before the season concludes. Nathaniel's expression grew tight with renewed tension, and Evelyn felt the familiar knot of anxiety return to her stomach as she watched him steel himself for the conversation ahead. I will find you before you leave, he promised her quietly. before following his aunt toward where Lord Whitmore waited, near the garden's entrance. Evelyn remained behind, watching him go, uncertain of what the coming conversation might mean for the fragile, hopeful future she had only just begun to imagine for herself alongside him. Lord Whitmore was a broad, imposing man with a booming voice and a manner of speaking that left little room for hesitation or disagreement. He greeted Nathaniel warmly near the garden's entrance, clasping his hand firmly while Lady Josephine hovered nearby, watching the exchange with visible approval. "Your Grace," Lord Whitmore began, his tone jovial but carrying an unmistakable undertone of expectation. "I trust you have given proper thought to the arrangement Mr. Bennet proposed on your behalf. My daughter speaks well of you, and I see no reason why we should not move forward with finalizing the details before autumn arrives." Nathaniel chose his words carefully, aware of how much weight this conversation carried, not only for the estate's future, but for the fragile hope he had only recently allowed himself to feel with Evelyn. "Lord Whitmore, I appreciate your patience in this matter, but I have not yet reached a final decision. There are considerations I must weigh carefully before committing to any arrangement of such significance." Lord Whitmore's jovial expression flickered slightly, a hint of impatience creeping into his voice. "Your Grace, forgive my bluntness, but delays of this nature rarely serve anyone's interests. The estate's difficulties will not resolve themselves through careful contemplation alone. I have heard whispers, of course, regarding a certain village schoolteacher who has been occupying a great deal of your attention lately. I would caution you against allowing such a distraction to interfere with decisions of far greater consequence." Nathaniel felt a flash of anger at the dismissive reference to Evelyn, though he forced himself to remain composed. "Miss Hart is not a distraction, Lord Whitmore. She is someone I care for deeply, and I would ask that you refrain from speaking of her in such a manner." Lady Josephine stepped in quickly, her voice smooth and placating. "Nathaniel, dear, I understand your feelings. Truly I do. But you must think of the larger picture here. The tenants who depend on this estate, the staff whose livelihoods rest upon its stability, they cannot afford for you to make decisions based purely on personal sentiment. I am well aware of my responsibilities," Nathaniel said tightly, "but I refuse to believe that fulfilling them requires abandoning every aspect of my own happiness in the process." Lord Whitmore studied him for a long moment before speaking again, his tone shifting to something more measured, almost sympathetic. "Your Grace, I understand the appeal of youthful romance. Truly I do. But estates such as yours were not built, nor sustained, through sentiment alone. I would ask that you consider carefully what you are willing to risk for a passing infatuation, against what you stand to lose, should the estate's finances collapse entirely." The conversation continued for several more tense minutes, Lord Whitmore and Lady Josephine both applying steady, careful pressure, until Nathaniel finally excused himself, promising only that he would give the matter serious consideration in the coming days, though privately his heart rebelled fiercely against everything they had suggested. He found Evelyn waiting near the edge of the garden, her expression carefully composed despite the obvious worry in her eyes. "How did it go?" she asked as he approached. "About as difficult as I expected," Nathaniel admitted, running a tired hand through his hair. "They are eager for an answer, and I fear my hesitation has only strengthened their resolve to press the matter further." Evelyn studied his troubled expression for a long moment before speaking, her voice quiet but steady. "Nathaniel, I do not wish to be the reason you struggle against your family's wishes, or the reason this estate faces greater difficulty than it already does. If marrying Miss Whitmore is truly what is required to secure its future, then perhaps that is the choice you must make, regardless of what exists between us." "Do not say that," Nathaniel said sharply, more forcefully than he intended. "I will not simply set aside what we have built together because it proves inconvenient to my family's expectations." "I am not asking you to set it aside," Evelyn said gently. "I am simply acknowledging the reality of your situation. You have responsibilities that extend far beyond your own personal happiness, Nathaniel. I understand that, even if it pains me to say it aloud." Nathaniel wanted desperately to argue further, to insist that there must be some other solution that did not require sacrificing either his duty or his heart, but the exhaustion of the day's difficult conversations weighed heavily upon him, and he found himself unable to offer her the certainty she deserved. In the days that followed, Nathaniel threw himself into reviewing the estate's finances more thoroughly than he had before, searching desperately for some alternative solution that might relieve the pressure to marry, purely for financial gain. But the numbers remained stubbornly grim, and with each passing day, Lord Whitmore's patience seemed to grow thinner, his messages to Bennett becoming increasingly insistent that a decision be reached soon. The strain began to show in Nathaniel's demeanor during their morning meetings at the lake, his usual warmth replaced by a distracted heaviness that Evelyn could not help but notice. Their conversations grew shorter, their laughter less frequent, as the weight of the decision looming over Nathaniel's future settled more firmly between them with each passing day. One particularly difficult morning, Nathaniel arrived at the lake later than usual, his expression drawn and tired in a way that immediately concerned Evelyn. "Bennett has informed me that Lord Whitmore expects a formal answer within the week," he said without preamble, sitting heavily on the familiar flat stone near the water's edge. "I do not know what I am going to do, Evelyn." Evelyn sat beside him, her own heart heavy with the knowledge of what such an answer might mean for the fragile future she had allowed herself to imagine. "What does your heart tell you to do?" she asked quietly. "My heart tells me to refuse the arrangement entirely and find some other way to save the estate," Nathaniel admitted. "But my mind reminds me, again and again, that I have found no other viable solution, and that the people who depend on this estate cannot afford for me to gamble their futures on hope alone." "Then perhaps your mind is right to be cautious," Evelyn said, though the words felt like ash in her mouth as she spoke them. Nathaniel turned to look at her, pain evident in his eyes. "Are you telling me to marry her?" "I am telling you that I understand the impossible position you have been placed in," Evelyn said, her voice trembling slightly despite her attempt to remain composed. "And I do not wish to make that position more difficult by asking you to choose me over the well-being of hundreds of people who depend upon this estate's survival." "You are not asking me to choose anything," Nathaniel said firmly. "I am the one who must make this decision, and I refuse to believe that the only path forward requires abandoning what exists between us." Despite his firm words, the days that followed brought no closer resolution, and the strain of the impending decision continued to weigh heavily upon both of them. Evelyn found herself increasingly withdrawn during their morning meetings, bracing herself for a heartbreak she feared was becoming inevitable, while Nathaniel grew more consumed by frustration at his inability to find any alternative solution to the estate's mounting financial pressures. It was during this difficult period that Evelyn made the painful decision to distance herself from Nathaniel entirely, believing it would be easier for them both if she removed herself from the equation before his family forced the issue in a manner far more painful for everyone involved. She stopped visiting the lake in the mornings, throwing herself instead into her work at the school, though the ache of missing him remained a constant, unwelcome companion throughout her days. Nathaniel noticed her absence immediately, his concern growing with each passing morning that he waited alone by the water's edge, watching the empty path through the trees for a figure that never appeared. After nearly a week of her continued absence, he finally sought her out directly, arriving unannounced at the small schoolhouse just as the last of the children were departing for the day. Evelyn's breath caught at the sight of him standing in the doorway, his expression a mixture of hurt and determination. "You have been avoiding me," he said simply, no accusation in his tone, only quiet sorrow. "I thought it would be easier," Evelyn admitted, unable to meet his eyes directly. "For both of us, when the time comes for you to make your decision." "Easier for whom?" Nathaniel asked, stepping further into the room. "Because it has certainly not been easier for me, Evelyn. Every morning I stand at that lake alone, and I have never felt the weight of this decision more heavily than in the moments when I realize you are not coming. I did not wish to make your choice more difficult by remaining a constant presence you would eventually have to walk away from," Evelyn said, her voice breaking slightly despite her efforts to remain composed. Nathaniel crossed the room and gently took her hands in his eyes searching hers with quiet intensity. "I have not made any decision yet, Evelyn, precisely because I refuse to accept that the only options before me are your happiness or the estate's survival. There must be another path, and I intend to find it, but I cannot search for it properly while believing I have already lost you in the process." Evelyn's resolve wavered under the sincerity in his voice, old fears warring against the hope she desperately wanted to allow herself to feel once more. "I am afraid, Nathaniel," she admitted softly, "afraid of hoping for something that circumstances beyond our control might ultimately take away, regardless of how either of us feels." "I understand that fear," Nathaniel said gently. "I feel it myself, more often than I care to admit. But I would rather face this uncertainty alongside you than push you away out of fear of what might happen if I do not. Evelyn allowed herself, finally, to lean into the comfort of his presence, the tension of the past difficult week slowly easing as he wrapped his arms around her. I do not know what the future holds for either of us, she admitted quietly against his shoulder. Neither do I, Nathaniel replied, his voice steady, despite the uncertainty of his words. But I intend to fight for a future where we do not have to choose between duty and happiness, even if I have not yet found the way to make that possible. Their fragile reconciliation offered a small measure of comfort against the uncertainty still hanging over them, though neither could fully shake the awareness that Lord Whitmore's patience was rapidly running out, and that the decision Nathaniel had been so desperately avoiding could not be postponed indefinitely. Within days, that uncertainty would take an unexpected turn, revealing truths about the estate's finances and about the motivations of those pressuring Nathaniel toward marriage that neither of them had anticipated. The unexpected turn came in the form of Henry Doyle, the estate's longtime steward, who had served the Ashworth family faithfully for over 20 years and had grown increasingly troubled by the urgency with which Bennet and Lady Josephine had been pushing Nathaniel toward marriage. Henry approached Nathaniel privately one evening, his weathered face carrying an expression of careful concern as he requested a moment of the Duke's time in the study. "Your Grace," Henry began, closing the door behind him to ensure their conversation remained private. "I have served this family for many years, and I feel it is my duty to bring something to your attention, even if doing so proves uncomfortable for those involved." "Go on," Nathaniel said, sensing immediately that whatever Henry had come to share carried significant weight. "I have reviewed the estate's accounts many times over the years, Your Grace, and I confess the figures Mr. Bennet presented to you regarding the severity of the current debts do not fully align with what I have observed in the ledgers myself," Henry said carefully. "I do not wish to make accusations without proper evidence, but I believe the situation may not be as dire as you have been led to believe." Nathaniel felt a cold clarity settle over him at Henry's words, pieces of a troubling puzzle beginning to fit together in his mind. "What are you suggesting, Henry?" "I am suggesting that it may be worth your while to review the accounts personally, Your Grace, rather than relying solely on the summary Mr. Bennet has provided," Henry said. "There are certain entries that I believe warrant closer examination." That very night, Nathaniel sat alone in the study long after the rest of the household had retired, poring carefully over the estate's financial records with Henry's guidance. What he discovered left him seething with a quiet, controlled fury unlike anything he had felt since his return to Ashworth. The debts, while real, were considerably smaller than what Bennet had originally presented, a fact obscured through careful manipulation of certain figures and the omission of several profitable holdings that had not been included in the initial accounting. Further investigation, conducted quietly over the following days with Henry's continued assistance, revealed an even more troubling truth. Lady Josephine, it seemed, stood to benefit significantly from a marriage between Nathaniel and Margaret Whitmore, an arrangement that would have secured a substantial portion of the estate's future income for her own branch of the family, a detail carefully concealed within the finer print of the marriage contract Bennet had originally presented for Nathaniel's approval. Armed with this new understanding, Nathaniel confronted both Bennet and his aunt directly, requesting their presence in the study, on a morning when he had also asked Henry to remain present as a witness to the conversation. "I have reviewed the estate's true financial position," Nathaniel said without preamble, as soon as they were all seated, his voice carrying a hard edge that neither Bennet nor Lady Josephine had heard from him before. "The debts are far less severe than what was presented to me, and the urgency with which I was pressured to accept a marriage arrangement appears to have served interests other than the estate's genuine well-being." Bennet's composure faltered visibly, though he attempted to maintain his professional demeanor. "Your Grace, I assure you, any discrepancies were simply matters of careful conservative accounting, meant to ensure the estate's long-term security." "Do not insult my intelligence, Bennet," Nathaniel said coldly. "I have seen the figures myself, and I have seen the terms of the marriage contract you presented, terms that would have significantly benefited my aunt's branch of the family, at the direct expense of the estate's broader interests." Lady Josephine's face had grown pale, though she attempted to salvage the situation with a tone of wounded dignity. "Nathaniel, whatever you believe you have uncovered, I assure you my intentions were only ever for the good of this family." The good of this family, or the good of your own finances? Nathaniel countered sharply. You allowed me to believe the estate's survival depended on a marriage I had no genuine desire to pursue, all while standing to profit considerably from the arrangement yourself. I trusted you, Aunt Josephine, and you took advantage of that trust for your own gain. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only when Lady Josephine finally lowered her gaze, unable to maintain her earlier composure under the weight of Nathaniel's justified anger. I did what I believed was necessary, she said quietly, though the admission carried the unmistakable weight of guilt. I feared for the family's future, and yes, I confess my own security factored into my urgency, but I never intended genuine harm to you, Nathaniel. Regardless of your intentions, the harm was real, Nathaniel said, his voice growing quieter but no less firm. I want the accounts reviewed properly, by someone independent of this family's interests, and I want the marriage arrangement with Lord Whitmore's family formally withdrawn. I will not be pressured into a decision built upon deception. Bennet, recognizing the seriousness of Nathaniel's resolve, quickly agreed to cooperate fully with whatever review the Duke deemed necessary, eager to salvage what remained of his professional reputation, despite his role in the deception. Lady Josephine, for her part, offered a reluctant apology, though the damage done to the trust between herself and her nephew would take considerably longer to repair, if it could be repaired at all. With the truth finally uncovered, Nathaniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had been carrying for weeks, though it was quickly replaced by a fierce eagerness to find Evelyn and share the news that had so dramatically altered the course of his future. He found her at the schoolhouse, just as she was preparing to leave for the day, her expression shifting to one of surprised curiosity at the evident change in his demeanor. Nathaniel, what has happened? She asked, noting the mixture of exhaustion and relief evident on his face. The debts were exaggerated, Nathaniel explained, unable to keep the note of triumphant relief from his voice. My aunt and Bennet manipulated the accounts to push me toward a marriage that would have benefited their own interests far more than the estate's actual needs. The true financial situation, while still requiring careful management, does not demand the drastic solution they insisted upon. Evelyn's eyes widened in shock at the revelation. Then you are not obligated to marry Miss Whitmore at all? No, Nathaniel confirmed, stepping closer to her, his eyes bright with a hope he had not allowed himself to fully feel in weeks. I am free to make my own choices regarding my future. Evelyn, choices I intend to make based on what truly matters to me, rather than manufactured urgency, designed to serve someone else's interests. Relief and joy washed over Evelyn's features, though a lingering trace of caution remained in her expression. What will you do now? She asked. I intend to reform how this estate is managed, Nathaniel said firmly. I will not allow myself to be so easily deceived again, and I intend to ensure that decisions regarding this family's future are made transparently, with the genuine well-being of everyone who depends on this estate given proper consideration, rather than the private interests of those seeking to benefit at others' expense. That sounds like the beginning of real change, Evelyn said softly, a genuine smile finally breaking through the caution that had guarded her expression. It is only the beginning, Nathaniel agreed, reaching for her hand. There is still a great deal of work ahead of me, repairing the trust that has been damaged, ensuring the estate's tenants and staff are treated fairly moving forward. But for the first time since I returned to Ashworth, I feel as though I am finally in control of my own future, rather than simply reacting to circumstances others have manufactured around me. Evelyn studied him for a long moment, warmth and admiration evident in her gaze. I am proud of you, Nathaniel, for seeking out the truth rather than simply accepting what you were told. I could not have found the courage to question everything without the example you set for me, Nathaniel admitted. Your honesty, your willingness to speak difficult truths even when they were uncomfortable, reminded me that I owed myself, and everyone who depends on this estate, the same courage. As the sun began to set over the village, casting long golden shadows across the schoolhouse yard, Nathaniel and Evelyn walked together toward the path that led back to the lake, both of them acutely aware that the difficult weeks behind them had finally given way to something resembling genuine hope for whatever future lay ahead. Yet even as relief settled comfortably between them, Nathaniel understood that resolving the estate's finances was only the first step in a much larger reckoning still to come, one that would require him to decide, once and for all, what kind of duke, and what kind of man, he truly wished to become. In the weeks that followed the confrontation with Bennett and Lady Josephine, Nathaniel threw himself into the work of rebuilding trust across the estate, both within his own household and among the tenants and villagers who had watched his family's affairs with cautious skepticism for years. He hired an independent accountant to review the estate's finances thoroughly, ensuring every figure could be verified and trusted. He met personally with tenant farmers to hear their concerns directly, rather than relying solely on second-hand reports filtered through staff, who did not always represent their interests fairly. Evelyn watched this transformation with quiet pride, continuing to meet Nathaniel at the lake each morning, their bond growing steadier and more certain with each passing week, now that the shadow of an unwanted marriage no longer loomed over their future. The village whispers, too, had begun to shift in tone, softening as word spread of the young duke's genuine efforts to improve conditions for those who depended upon the estate, and of his unwavering loyalty to the schoolteacher who had captured his heart despite the obstacles placed in their path. Yet even as their relationship deepened, Evelyn found herself increasingly aware of a quiet restlessness in Nathaniel, a sense that he was still searching for something beyond simply correcting the estate's immediate problems. She noticed it most clearly during their morning swims, in the moments when his attention would drift, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the lake's calm surface, his mind clearly occupied with thoughts he had not yet fully shared with her. One particularly clear morning, as autumn's first cool breeze swept gently across the water, Evelyn decided to address the matter directly. "You have seemed distracted lately," she observed, as they sat together on the familiar flat stone near the shore. "Is something still troubling you?" Nathaniel considered her question carefully before answering. "I have been thinking a great deal about what kind of duke I wish to become," he admitted. "Correcting the immediate deception was necessary, but I do not wish to simply return to the way things were before, with the estate run purely for the comfort of those living in the manor, while the tenants and villagers who make our prosperity possible are left with little say in decisions that directly affect their lives." "What are you thinking of doing?" Evelyn asked, genuinely curious. "I want to establish a more direct relationship between the estate and the community it depends upon," Nathaniel explained, his voice growing more animated as he spoke. "Regular meetings with tenant representatives, fair and transparent agreements regarding land use and rents, perhaps even support for improving the village school and expanding its resources. I do not want to simply be a distant figure people fear or resent. I want Ashworth to genuinely serve the people who call it home, not merely extract from them." Evelyn felt a warm swell of admiration at his words, though she also sensed there was something more he had not yet fully expressed. "That sounds like meaningful work," she said gently. "But I sense there is something else on your mind as well." Nathaniel turned to face her fully, his expression growing more serious, though not with worry this time, but with a quiet, determined resolve. "I have realized, over these past difficult weeks, that I do not wish to pursue this work alone," he said. "Every idea I have had for improving this estate, for building something genuinely worthwhile out of what I inherited, has been shaped by conversations with you, by your perspective on what the village truly needs, by your understanding of people and community that I lack entirely on my own." Evelyn's heart began to beat a little faster, uncertain of exactly where this conversation was leading, though a flicker of hopeful anticipation stirred within her chest. "What are you saying, Nathaniel?" "I am saying that I do not wish to simply build a better future for this estate," Nathaniel said, taking her hands gently in his. "I wish to build it alongside you, as true partners in the work, not merely as a duke seeking counsel from someone he cares for, but as two people genuinely working together towards something meaningful." Evelyn had, in the quiet moments of her own private hopes, imagined this conversation taking a very different direction, imagined perhaps a proposal of marriage, a declaration that would settle every uncertainty about their future in one grand, sweeping gesture. But what Nathaniel offered instead was something she had not expected at all, something that struck her as even more meaningful than the fairy tale ending she might once have imagined. "You are not asking me to be your duchess," she said slowly, working through the realization even as she spoke it aloud. "Not yet," Nathaniel said, a small, warm smile touching his lips. "Perhaps, in time, if that is what we both come to want. But for now, I am asking you to help me build something real here, something that matters, not because of any title either of us might hold, but because we believe genuinely in the value of the work itself. I want your guidance in shaping how the estate serves its people. I want your voice heard directly in the decisions that affect this community, not simply as my companion, but as someone whose judgment I trust and value in its own right. Evelyn felt tears gathering unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, moved deeply by the sincerity and respect embedded within his unusual, unexpected offer. That is the last thing I expected you to say, she admitted, laughing softly through her emotion. Is it a welcome surprise, or an unwelcome one? Nathaniel asked, a hint of vulnerability creeping into his otherwise confident tone. Entirely welcome, Evelyn said, squeezing his hands warmly within her own. You have offered me something far more valuable than a title, Nathaniel. You have offered me a genuine partnership, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. I would be honored to help you build a better future for this community. Over the following months, the two of them worked closely together, establishing regular gatherings where tenant farmers and village representatives could voice their concerns directly to the estate's leadership. Evelyn's insight into the community's genuine needs proved invaluable, helping Nathaniel avoid the kind of well-intentioned but poorly informed decisions that might otherwise have undermined his efforts. The village school received meaningful improvements, additional resources, and even a small expansion to accommodate more children, funded not through charity alone, but through a genuine restructuring of how the estate's profits were shared with the community that sustained it. The whispers that had once followed Evelyn through the village streets gradually transformed into something closer to respect and admiration, as neighbors who had once questioned her intentions came to witness firsthand the meaningful changes her partnership with Nathaniel had brought to their daily lives. Even Lady Josephine, humbled by the exposure of her earlier deception, slowly began to rebuild her relationship with Nathaniel, offering genuine, if cautious, support for the reforms he pursued alongside Evelyn. On a crisp autumn morning nearly a year after their first unexpected encounter at the lake, Nathaniel and Evelyn stood together at the water's edge, watching the early light spread golden across the surface they had come to think of as uniquely their own. So much had changed since that first startled meeting, when Evelyn had feared discovery and punishment, and Nathaniel had stood at the edge of a life he had never wanted, burdened by expectations that felt suffocating and hollow. Do you remember what I said to you that first morning? Nathaniel asked, glancing at her with a fond, reflective smile. About how the lake finally looked alive for the first time since I arrived? I remember, Evelyn said softly, leaning her head against his shoulder as they watched the gentle ripples move across the water. It was the last thing I expected you to say, after being caught trespassing on a duke's private property. I have found, over this past year, that you have a wonderful habit of being the source of exactly the things I least expect, yet most need, Nathaniel said, pressing a gentle kiss against the top of her head. Evelyn smiled, closing her eyes and allowing herself, fully and without reservation, to embrace the unexpected, beautiful life that had grown from a single startled encounter beside a quiet, private lake. Whatever challenges still lay ahead of them, whatever further tests their partnership might yet face, she found herself confident, for the first time in a long while, that they would face them together, as true equals building something meaningful, rather than simply two people from different worlds hoping desperately that difference would not matter. And as the morning sun continued its steady climb above the trees, casting warm light across the water that had brought them together in the first place, both of them understood, without needing to speak the words aloud, that whatever came next, they were ready to meet it side by side. The following spring brought a challenge neither Nathaniel nor Evelyn had anticipated, one that tested the strength of everything they had built together over the past year. A late frost swept unexpectedly across the countryside, damaging a significant portion of the crops the tenant farmers depended upon for their livelihood. Panic spread quickly through the village, families fearing they would not have enough to sustain themselves through the coming months, let alone pay the rents owed to the estate. Nathaniel called an emergency meeting of the tenant council the very morning the extent of the damage became clear, gathering farmers, village leaders, and Evelyn together in the estate's largest hall to discuss how best to respond. Some among the older tenants expected the kind of cold indifference they remembered from Nathaniel's father, a demand that rents be paid regardless of circumstance. But Nathaniel's approach proved entirely different. We will adjust the rents for this season according to the actual damage each farm has suffered, he announced firmly, standing before the assembled group, with Evelyn seated close beside him. No family will be forced into hardship because of circumstances entirely beyond their control. We will also use a portion of the estate's reserves to provide seed and support for replanting where possible. A murmur of surprised relief spread through the hall, though one older farmer, a stern man named Edmund Foley who had long harbored doubts about the young duke's intentions, raised a skeptical voice. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but we have heard fine promises before, only to see them forgotten once the immediate crisis passes." Evelyn spoke up then, her voice steady and familiar to many in the room who had watched her teach their children for years. "Mr. Foley, I have worked alongside the Duke these past months, and I can tell you honestly that the changes made to how this estate operates are not temporary gestures. The tenant council itself exists because he insisted the people of this community deserved a genuine voice in decisions that affect their lives. I would not stand beside him today if I did not believe in the sincerity of that commitment." Edmund studied her carefully, the weight of her words clearly carrying influence given the trust the community had placed in her over many years. Slowly, he nodded, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "Very well," he said. "We will see this through together then." Over the following weeks, Nathaniel and Evelyn worked tirelessly alongside the tenant council to coordinate relief efforts, distributing seed for replanting, adjusting financial arrangements fairly, according to each family's individual circumstances, and ensuring that no household was left to face the crisis entirely alone. The crisis, difficult as it was, ultimately became a powerful demonstration of the genuine partnership between the estate and its community, further strengthening the trust that had been so carefully rebuilt over the previous months. It was during this period of shared hardship and cooperation that Nathaniel found himself reflecting more deeply than ever on the nature of his feelings for Evelyn, and on the kind of future he genuinely wished to build with her. Watching her work tirelessly alongside frightened, struggling families, offering comfort alongside practical assistance, he understood with growing clarity that she was not simply someone who complemented his work as Duke. She was, in every sense that mattered, someone he wished to build his entire life alongside, not out of convenience or partnership alone, but out of a deep and genuine love that had grown steadily since that very first startled morning at the lake. One evening, as the immediate crisis began to ease and the village slowly returned to a sense of cautious normalcy, Nathaniel invited Evelyn to walk with him along the familiar path toward the lake, though he carried with him an intention he had been quietly nurturing for several weeks. The evening air was warm and fragrant with the scent of blooming flowers, the sky painted in soft shades of orange and pink as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. "You have been rather quiet this evening," Evelyn observed as they walked, glancing at him with gentle curiosity. "I have been thinking," Nathaniel admitted, "about how much has changed since the first morning I found you swimming in this lake, uninvited and entirely unafraid of the consequences, even as you tried desperately to appear otherwise." Evelyn laughed softly at the memory. "I was terrified that morning, though I suppose I hid it reasonably well." "You hid it wonderfully," Nathaniel agreed, a fond smile touching his lips. "And in the year since, you have shown me, again and again, a kind of courage and honesty I had never encountered before returning to Ashworth. You have challenged me to become a better Duke, certainly, but more importantly, you have challenged me to become a better man." They arrived at the lake as the last light of the sun spread golden across its familiar surface, and Nathaniel stopped walking, turning to face Evelyn fully, his expression carrying a seriousness that immediately caught her attention. "Evelyn," he began, his voice steady despite the evident emotion behind his words, "these past months, working alongside you, building something meaningful together, have shown me with absolute certainty what I want for the rest of my life. I do not wish simply to be your partner in managing this estate. I wish to be your husband, to build a life with you that extends far beyond the work we share, though I hope that work will always remain a meaningful part of what binds us together." Evelyn's breath caught, tears gathering unexpectedly in her eyes, as the weight of his words settled fully upon her. "Nathaniel," she whispered, hardly able to believe the moment unfolding before her. "I know that a year ago, the idea of a Duke marrying a village schoolteacher would have seemed impossible to nearly everyone in this community," Nathaniel continued, kneeling gently before her beside the water they had come to think of as uniquely their own. "But I have learned, through everything we have faced together, that the differences people once believed mattered so greatly are nothing compared to the genuine connection we share. I love you, Evelyn Hart, not for what you might bring to this estate, but simply for who you are. Will you marry me?" Evelyn felt the full weight of joy and relief and overwhelming love crash over her all at once. Memories of every difficult moment they had faced together, every whispered doubt she had struggled against, dissolving entirely in the face of the sincere devotion evident in his eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with happiness. "Yes, Nathaniel, I will marry you." Nathaniel rose to his feet, gathering her into his arms as the last light of the setting sun bathed them both in warm golden light, the lake beside them reflecting the same peaceful stillness that had first brought them together on that unexpected morning so many months before. News of their engagement spread quickly through the village and beyond, met with far greater warmth and acceptance than either of them might have imagined possible a year earlier. The tenant farmers, having witnessed firsthand the genuine partnership between Nathaniel and Evelyn during the difficult spring crisis, celebrated the announcement as confirmation of the kind of future they hoped the Ashworth estate would continue to build. Even Lady Josephine, humbled by her earlier deception and genuinely moved by the transformation she had witnessed in her nephew over the preceding months, offered her heartfelt congratulations, along with a sincere promise to support the couple in whatever ways she could. Their wedding, held the following autumn beside the very lake where their story had begun, was a simple, joyful affair, attended by villagers and estate staff alike, a genuine celebration of two people whose different worlds had ultimately proven far less important than the love and respect they had built together. As Nathaniel and Evelyn exchanged their vows beneath the golden autumn light, surrounded by the community they had worked so hard to serve, both understood with quiet certainty that the unexpected encounter beside a private lake had led them, against every conventional expectation, to exactly the life they were always meant to share. In the years that followed, the Ashworth estate flourished under their combined guidance, becoming known throughout the region as a model of fair and thoughtful stewardship, a place where duty and genuine care for community were never treated as opposing forces, but as two halves of the same meaningful purpose. And each morning, regardless of how many responsibilities awaited them throughout the day, Nathaniel and Evelyn continued their tradition of swimming together in the quiet waters of the lake that had first brought them together, a peaceful reminder of how far they had come, and of the simple, unexpected beginning from which their entire beautiful life together had grown.